It was just another night in my small apartment. The kind of night where the city outside feels like it's holding its breath, and all you can hear is the hum of the refrigerator or the occasional car passing by on the street below. I thought nothing of it at first, when I heard the faint scratching sound coming from my bedroom wall. At least that's what I told myself as I lay there in bed, staring up at the ceiling. It wasn't loud enough to wake me completely, but it was persistent, like someone running their fingernails along a chalkboard, only softer, more deliberate. My heart started pounding almost immediately. I tried to convince myself it was just the old pipes settling, or maybe a squirrel trapped somewhere in the walls. But deep down, I knew better. I sat up slowly, listening harder. The sound stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the whisper. "Help me." It was so soft, barely audible yet unmistakable. A woman's voice, trembling with fear. I froze, my skin prickling with goosebumps. My mind raced. Was I dreaming? Had I imagined it? No, the scratch marks on the wall behind me were real. They hadn't been there earlier that evening. Thin, jagged lines carved into the paint, as if something, or someone, had clawed its way out. That's when I decided to investigate. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every step toward the wall felt heavier than the last. My hands shook as I reached for the flashlight on my bedside table. The beam of light illuminated the damage, fresh gouges in the drywall, some deeper than others. And then I noticed something else. A tiny scrap of fabric caught between two of the scratches. It looked like lace, delicate and white, torn as though yanked violently from whatever it had once belonged to. My phone buzzed suddenly, startling me. It was a text message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "They know you're here." Panic surged through me. Who was they? And how did they even know I existed? Before I could think too hard about it, another noise drew my attention back to the wall. A soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, 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 like fingers knocking against glass. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. There was no answer. Just silence. Complete, suffocating silence. But then, the whispers began. At first they were faint, almost imperceptible, like voices carried on the wind. But soon, they grew louder, clearer, until they filled the room. Dozens of them, overlapping each other, speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Some sounded angry, others desperate, and a few eerily calm, as if trying to lull me into complacency. I backed away from the wall, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. I needed answers, and fast. The next morning, I called Sarah, my best friend since college. She'd always been skeptical of anything supernatural, which made her the perfect person to ground me if things got weird, which obviously they already had. "Sarah, you won't believe what happened," I said as soon as she picked up. "Hey, slow down. What's going on?" So I told her everything. The scratching, the whispers, the strange text message, the lace fragment. By the time I finished, she was silent for so long that I thought we'd lost connection. "Are you still there?" I asked nervously. "I'm here," she finally replied. "Listen, I hate to say this, but have you considered that maybe you're stressed or tired? Maybe your mind's playing tricks on you?" "It's not stress, Sarah. There are actual marks on my wall, and the text. I showed it to you. You saw it yourself." She sighed. "Okay, fine. Let me come over later today. We'll figure this out together." When Sarah arrived, she brought coffee and a healthy dose of skepticism. Together, we examined the wall, taking photos and measuring the depth of the scratches. Nothing seemed to add up. The marks weren't consistent with any known pests or structural issues. And the lace? That remained a mystery. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the apartment grew increasingly oppressive. Shadows seemed longer, corners darker. Even Sarah admitted she felt uneasy. "I don't like this," she muttered under her breath as we packed up our things. "Something about this place isn't right." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. That night, the activity intensified. The scratching returned, louder and more erratic. The whispers became shouts, echoing through the walls and rattling the windows. I grabbed my laptop, desperate for answers. That's when I stumbled across a local news article from 5 years ago. A young woman named Clara had disappeared from an apartment building less than a mile from mine. Her case had never been solved, but witnesses reported hearing strange noises coming from her unit in the days leading up to her disappearance. One neighbor described seeing a shadowy figure standing outside her window late at night. My stomach churned as I read further. Clara's apartment had been directly above mine. The realization hit me like a freight train. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. It was connected to Clara. And somehow, it had chosen me. Over the following days, the phenomena escalated. Objects moved without explanation. Doors creaked open and shut on their own. The temperature in my apartment dropped drastically, leaving frost forming on the windows. Each new development chipped away at my sanity, leaving me exhausted and terrified. And then, one night, the mirror spoke. I woke abruptly to find my reflection staring back at me, not sleeping peacefully, as it should have been, but wide awake, eyes locked onto mine. Its lips parted, and it whispered, "You're next." I screamed, scrambling backward until my back hit the headboard. When I turned back to look, the image was gone. The mirror showed only my frightened face staring back at me. Desperate for help, I reached out to a paranormal investigator I found online. His name was Marcus, and he claimed to specialize in cases like mine. Skeptical but desperate, I invited him over. Marcus arrived armed with cameras, audio recorders, and a device he called an EMF meter. He set up equipment throughout the apartment while I recounted every detail of what had happened. As he worked, his expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "This is bad," he said quietly. "Whatever's here, it's powerful and angry." Hours passed as we waited for something to happen. Finally, the EMF meter spiked, buzzing loudly. At the same instant, the lights flickered and the temperature plummeted. A cold breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender. Then, the voice came, not from the walls, not from the mirror, but directly in my ear. "Leave." Marcus spun around, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, unable to speak. We spent the rest of the night documenting evidence, capturing footage of objects moving and disembodied footsteps echoing through the halls. But none of it prepared us for what happened next. In the early hours of the morning, the entity revealed itself, not as a shadow or a whisper, but as a presence so overwhelming it stole the air from my lungs. It filled the room, consuming everything: light, sound, hope. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed, as it communicated through thoughts planted directly in my mind. "You took her place," it said. "Now you belong." The world went black. When I woke, I was alone in my apartment. The scratches on the wall were gone, as was the lace fragment. Everything appeared normal, except for one thing: the mirror. Instead of reflecting my image, it showed Clara's face staring back at me, pale and hollow-eyed. "Help me," she mouthed silently before vanishing. I haven't slept in my apartment since. I sold everything I owned and moved far away, hoping to escape whatever force claimed Clara, and now seems determined to claim me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. Sometimes I feel the cold breath on the back of my neck. And sometimes I wonder if I really am safe, or if I've simply traded one prison for another. Because the truth is, I don't know if Clara ever escaped, and I don't know if I will either.